straight from the mayor's mouth, with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
Hello everyone and welcome to Straight from the Mayor's Mouth. Good morning, Matt. How are you, buddy?
A bit warmer now. The Saturday morning was a bit of an early cold start, wasn't it?
It was, wasn't it? Hey, wasn't it nice to see you at the Parkrun again? And congratulations, 9 years for the Parkrun, isn't it? Isn't it fabulous?
It is fantastic, and they do a great job, and I was fortunate enough to speak at their 9th anniversary celebration.
Yes.
And I actually had a bit of a think about the Parkrun, and I've done Parkruns around the place. In fact, I did a quick count. 18 different locations I've done Parkrun at.
18?
Now, there are some incredible number like 493 around the world, so I've got a long way to go.
Yes.
But I started thinking about those 18, what do I think is different about Dubbo Parkrun compared to the other 18? And there's a few different stats they have on the Parkrun page. So if you look at that, you can see that Dubbo has about 260 people per Parkrun on average.
Yes.
Pretty impressive.
Feels like that, yes.
And even on Saturday morning when it was cold, there was still a lot there. I haven't looked at the exact numbers.
A lot of dedicated parkrunners here in Dubbo.
Several hundred.
Yes.
Across the world, the average parkrunners at each event is 117.
Oh, wow. We're
so
well
we do
above that.
pretty well. And typically in Australia, when you look at the stats at the end of the year, typically Dubbo Parkrun's in the top 10, say, for the number of parkrunners each week. So that's pretty impressive. But then you start to look at the times. It's not a competition. It's
Until
just
it is.
That's right. It's just a Saturday morning
Just like
activity.
the ad.
That's right. So we're not the fastest. We average about 37 minutes and 28 seconds. And that's great. That means there are community people down there just doing a nice walk. Worldwide average is 33 minutes and 17 seconds.
So does that mean the people around the world are faster and fitter than us, or what does that mean?
Well, I think there's probably more walkers at Dubbo.
Yes.
So you look at that, but then you start to break down the raw numbers. In those 9 years, 9,356 people have participated. So it's essentially, and lots of visitors as well, but that's about a fifth the population of Dubbo have been through Parkrun. 1,247 people have volunteered.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive.
That's really impressive,
That's
isn't it?
right. But the one that I like the most, when I go to other Parkruns and you sit there at the beginning or stand there at the beginning and listen to the announcements at the beginning and they talk about the fact that they've got this event and there's some volunteers needed, then often they'll talk about we need some more volunteers for not next month or next week. Sometimes we need some more volunteers for today.
Yes.
We can't run Parkrun without some more volunteers. Can some people just give up half of volunteering? Can they just volunteer for the first part and we'll get someone else to fill in the second half? Or next week we're 5 volunteers short. One thing that sets Dubbo Parkrun apart, you can look at all the stats in the world that you like, the thing that sets Dubbo Parkrun apart is if you want to volunteer, which I'd encourage you to do, you've got to book in a month in advance.
Yes.
At least a month
right.
in advance.
That's right.
And I know when I've talked about some volunteering groups, I know councils volunteered, for example, from time to time. And so there's a volunteer group. I said, when can we do that next week? No, we're booking in a couple months in advance
That's right.
to make sure
How are you situated for October?
Yeah,
That's
like
sort of
that.
absolutely.
And they do get lots of groups. I think there was one stage there they went for a couple of months where there was a group volunteering. So, for example, council, 1 week might be one of those volunteer groups. So there are all these different groups. So it's not just individuals in Dubbo who get behind Parkrun and volunteer. There are also people who are in groups. It might be sporting groups, it might be work groups, different groups who get involved as well. The other part that I think makes it really powerful is you've got some of those founding volunteers. So you've got people like Miriam and Tim, you've got John Robbins and Karen Pello. So you've got people like that have been there since day one. I mean, Miriam drove it, and congratulations to Miriam, still there now. She's had a pretty good journey along there. In driving it, she dragged Tim Morris into the process, and so in getting Parkrun started, she ended up getting a husband out of it. So Tim, she got to help get going.
It's a social event, folks. A lot more can come from just simply the social aspect. Absolutely.
And so now you see Tim out there on Saturday morning, had the pram there with 2 kids in there. So go back more than 9 years ago, the story goes something like Miriam was trying to find some way to mark out a course and get Parkrun started, and someone said that Tim Morris had access to the measuring stick, the measuring wheel, and to measure an accurate course. So, Tim, I've heard you got this. Can you help me with that? Again, as history says, they end up getting married with a couple of kids along the way. So there's a whole family there of people that have grown up knowing each other. I call them my Parkrun acquaintances. I I wouldn't ring them for a cup of coffee. I wouldn't even probably know them if I ran them down the street. But on Saturday morning, you'll have a good 15-minute chat to them after the event.
You know what I love about Parkrun too? You're spot on there, because one of the things I absolutely just love about it is when you're out going for your run and you're running along, just if you're doing a personal run during the week, it's all very isolated. It's just you and your time and your clock, and you're out and about. At Parkrun, when you're running out there, you'll be passing people all the time. Hey, Mark, how you going? Hey, Terry, what's going on?
Yeah.
It's a very, very social event. I just love that whole feel of it. And as you say, it's not like you sit around and then catch up and have – some people do, but it's not like you sit out and say, okay, what are we doing for the restaurant meal this week or anything. They're not that type of acquaintance, but it's just that wonderful feel week in, week out. So, 9 years. That's very impressive.
Encourage people to go along. It is cold sometimes. It is rainy. It'll be on every week. 8 a.m. they'll start, and it's 5Ks. And again, you've got people who are there walking, and they'll do it in an hour. You've got other people who are very good, and they'll do it in 17 minutes. So,
that's not me, by the way.
But there's a whole variety. No one judges anyone.
No.
It's very welcoming. And I think the main message I had from when I spoke there on Saturday morning was thank you to the volunteers. Thank you everyone that turns up every week, but thank you to the volunteers. The volunteers make Dubbo Parkrun better than any of the 493 parkruns out there. I'm happy to go out on a limb and say it's the best based on our volunteering alone.
Oh, absolutely. Well done, Dubbo Parkrun. All right, let's jump straight into this week, Matt. I want to start off with a nice little juicy one. Australia Day. Now, the federal government's made an announcement here in regards to where Australia Day itself doesn't change. It's still 26th of January. It's always been 26th, well, not always been, but it's been 26th of January now for quite a while from the point of view of Australia Day celebrations. The federal government's made a decision here whereby councils have got a couple of days before Australia Day, the 26th, and a couple of days after the 26th to celebrate Australia Day. Now, there's been a decision made here a couple of years ago that Wellington changed the day of celebrations to it wasn't actually on Australia Day. I think they either moved it before or after. Not quite sure exactly what. I think it might be the day before. Dubbo, however, has always celebrated Australia Day on the 26th of January. There was a standing committee meeting during the week, and I see here where the whole discussion, one of the main points of discussion, centred around, are we going to maintain the celebration for Australia Day here in Dubbo on the 26th of January? What can you tell us?
Well, it was a very interesting discussion. A lot of good debate, a lot of different points of view came forward at the Standing Committee meeting. And if I go back very briefly, for the last 2 years, so 2023 and 2024, Australia Day, not changing the date. I can't emphasise enough.
Right. And you can't do that.
We can't do that.
No,
Council does not have the power to change the date. Australia Day in this nation is the 26th of January, full stop. No one's talking, well, certainly we're not talking about changing the date. Some people might be, but we're not talking about that. We don't have the power to do that. We're recognising that as the date. But what we've done for the last 2 years is we've said, let's have the event itself where you announce the Citizen of the Year and you celebrate Australia Day as a twilight event. And we've done that in Wellington on the 25th. And the first year we did it at 5:30 p.m. We still found it was pretty hot then, so we changed it to 6:30 p.m. And that was really well received this year. Yep. Now, there's some people who aren't happy about that. I understand that completely. When it's on the 26th, there's some people who aren't happy about that as well. And that's what happens in government, in leadership. You can't make decisions that are going to keep everyone happy. You've got to weigh up all the different points of view and make a decision you think is the best outcome for the entire community. So that's worked well in Wellington. Dubbo, though, has held it early. We're talking about 8 a.m. sort of time frame on the 26th of January the last 2 years. Now, 2025 is an interesting one.
Right.
Because Australia Day itself falls on a Sunday.
Okay.
That means the public holiday is the Monday.
Right. So we've literally got 3 days.
So you've got a long weekend.
Yep.
Saturday,
Sunday,
Monday.
there, set up. Okay.
And that's the last weekend, of course, before school goes back the following week. So you will have people who are potentially going away that weekend, last trip, maybe go into the dam, do a bit of skiing, wherever they might go. They've got that 3-day weekend. So the discussion was around what do we do with the two events that we've got? We could have them both on the 26th of January. We could change the Wellington one to be back on the day, or we could have them as a twilight event. We could have one or both as a twilight event. You could even go back to the Friday night, so you have an event on the Friday night, and then you've got our residents with the 3 days, a full long weekend to go away, rather than say, I've got to be around on the 26th to actually go to that event. We could have them on the Monday night. So you come back after the long weekend and you go, well, come back ready for that Australia Day event on the Monday.
And remember, this has all been, the opportunity to do this has now been given to us by the federal government.
Andrew
this is-
Giles, the minister, changed the Australian Citizenship Ceremonies Code so that we can actually have a window of 3 days before or 3 days after the event. So you could go back on the 23rd, 24th or 25th, or you could go forward 27, 28, 29. So a lot of discussion, debate, a lot of different opinions there. But the important part here is we've made a recommendation, which I'll talk to you about in a moment.
Yeah.
But the crucial part is that's a recommendation to the next council meeting, which occurs 2 weeks after the standing committee
This is a
meeting.
standing committee, so any discussion, this is not a resolution, this is just a discussion that you then bring forward to the council meeting saying this is what we came up with.
Well, it's more than a discussion, it's a recommendation.
A recommendation.
So the good part about this is it gives you an idea of what councillors are thinking before the meeting. So that standing committee meeting was held on the 11th of July and the council meeting is 2 weeks after that. So on the 25th of July is our council meeting. Standing committees can't make council resolutions. They can't make decisions of council except, little asterisk there, except in relation to tenders. That's one exclusion. We've given standing committees the delegated authority to make decisions for tenders only. And there's a whole range of reasons I won't waste our time on now going through why. But the critical part is everything else that happens at a standing committee meeting is a recommendation to the council meeting. Now, the great part about that is people listen to us having this conversation, or they might read the outcomes from the business papers, or they might hear an interview on a radio station or talk to a friend at the pub. The great part is you've got that chance to contact your preferred councillor or councillors and say, here's what I think. Send them an email, make a phone call, send them a text message, whatever. Get in contact with them and say, here's what I think, but we've given some direction to begin with, some idea of how we're thinking. It doesn't mean the same thing will happen at the council meeting in 2 weeks' time. In fact, sometimes it does change from the standing committee meeting. Sometimes it doesn't. But that will be when the decision's made. So what we've recommended is that we have Wellington on the Friday night, 6:30 p.m. on the 24th of January.
Right. Yep.
Dubbo on the Saturday night, again 6:30 p.m. on the 25th of January. Both twilight events, although I'm not sure if Friday night's technically a twilight event, given it's 2 days before. The idea here is, again, take away from the day, there are some sensitivities with our Aboriginal population. And if it means having the event the night before, 2 nights before, and include Aboriginal people as part of this event, because they're a great part of Australia. They've been here for 60,000 years. Why wouldn't we want them to be part of the celebration? But when we have an event on the 26th, there are Aboriginal people in our community who find the sensitivities around that in terms of it being Invasion Day, for example, then that makes it difficult for them to be part of the event. So if it means having it the night before and including our Aboriginal population, that seems like a reasonable outcome. And it's worked again, the last 2 years in Wellington. So that's part of it. But the other part is it's hot in Dubbo and Wellington. Having an event, and we've had an event pretty early in Dubbo, for example, at 8 a.m, but having an event at 8 a.m. on the morning of, well, have it at 6:30 p.m. the night before tends to make more sense, and it is a bit more comfortable in that temperature.
I think the other thing you pointed out here is the fact it's what has happened what will be happening in 2025. It's going to be a long weekend. So there's an opportunity here as well people can still, if they want to celebrate Australia Day on the 26th of January, have their barbecues and those sort of things, well, you go for your life. It's happy days. A lot of people still do that. I know we still have our own Australia Day celebrations, and we'll probably still do it on the 26th because that's sort of a day we set aside. It'll be a Sunday. It'll work out quite nicely. But from the point of view of council here, it's obviously the reason behind this too is that keeping in mind what the nature of the celebration's about. A lot of it is recognising the citizens who have done extraordinary things in our community, isn't it? That's really the main central piece. There's also the whole nature of the fact that we talk about the nature of being what it means to be Australian, and there's obviously our guest speakers get up and talk. But really, the predominant focus is about the citizens who have done something exceptional. So to create an opportunity for them to be celebrated and spoken about, it's a bit like this, I think. If you've got a birthday party and you're sort of thinking to yourself, okay, I've got a special event coming up. I've got my 50th coming up, let's say. I wish it was 50th. That was a few years ago. But let's say there's a birthday party coming up. And you've suddenly think, oh, wait a minute, it's on the Wednesday, it's midweek, it's not really probably an ideal time to have a big celebration like that. I'll tell you what, we might have it the Saturday before because, people can get to it, we can book the venue, it's a nice time to do it. I'm still celebrating my 50th, but I'm just having the party a little bit before. I'm doing the celebration a little bit before. It's not going to change the day of my 50. I can still have a cake on that night with family or whatever I want to do. But to have with the friends and everyone together, it's more convenient. I'm going to have it a few days beforehand. To me, that's the way I see this. There is absolutely the sensitivity issue we talk about, but there's also other factors that come in on this, which makes it, I think, a lot easier for everybody as well.
That's a good example because you do that regularly. There's
Absolutely.
no question about it. If you had a major birthday or any birthday in the middle of the week, you would logically hold your party the weekend before or the weekend after. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And keep in mind that when we have our major award ceremony for this nation, being named the Australian of the Year is a pretty significant thing for anyone that's been named Australian of the Year. Normally, it's a former Australian cricket test captain.
That's right. Yes, they do tend to get a few of those, don't they? That's right.
But that event is held as a twilight event.
And that's been going on for years.
That has been going on for years. So the Prime Minister of the nation announces and has a ceremony for the Australian of the Year and other awards associated with that as a twilight event. That seems to have been generally accepted by the community. So,
why is it then the fact that we don't make such a big song and dance about that? Yet when it comes to our own little celebrations and that we do here, it does create a lot of discussion in our community. What are your thoughts on that? Why do you think that's the case?
I think that there are times when change is uncomfortable. I just think in general people are happy with things staying pretty much the same way because that's comfortable. That's what people understand. And if you don't change things, then things just keep going along like they are. Now, the reality is that change is inevitable. Change is going to happen, whether we like it or not, in everything that we do. Change is constantly occurring. What you want in leadership, in my opinion, is people who are happy to embrace and adopt change rather than people who are going to hold back and be laggards, and I'm talking about the diffusion of innovation graph here, the technical term laggards, be laggards and wait for everything else to happen first and then catch up. I personally would prefer the council, the state government, the federal government, all those leadership areas there, I'd prefer those to be out in front, to be embracing change, to be adopting change and trying to lead the way rather than sitting back as laggards and waiting for everything else to happen and then catching up. The most successful businesses I see out there are businesses that are being nimble, agile, changing to conditions, adopting. During COVID, we saw some businesses be incredibly successful. We saw some other businesses fail. And different markets, different sectors were difficult. You can't say it was always up to the operator. Hospitality would have been very difficult to continue to operate very successfully during COVID. But there were business leaders, business owners who adopted change, who adapted to what was happening, and they did that well. So external conditions change, you can't control that. How can we adapt to those things?
It's almost like a mindset change, isn't it, almost as well? The fact, as you're saying there, that we do get very used to a certain way of doing things, and we get very comfortable in that space. And quite often we base our opinions and our ideas and our thoughts and all of that around what we feel comfortable with. And something like this, I can see, it does make certain people feel a bit uncomfortable. I can understand that because it does, as you say, it creates a sense of change. And change can be uncomfortable. But again, I just see this, the fact that and I suppose I'm putting it out there, I'm happy to see the change come through. I'm more, as a citizen here, this is my citizen's opinion. Mainly because of the fact I think we're not changing Australia Day. Australia Day stays as the 26th of January. That's what it is. The government's, they're the only people who can make that change. And at this point in time, Australia Day is still the 26th of January. The celebration, well, they've given us the opportunity here to celebrate whenever we feel fit over 3 days before or 3 days after. Again, I just keep bringing back to a classic example, and our mindset on that is quite simple, about like a 50th birthday party. If it happens during the week, we'll have our parties. Doesn't change the day of our birthday. It's still going to be that certain day, but we'll have our parties to celebrate it to accommodate what best suits everybody. And that, to me, I think is just something to consider as well when you go through, and to the councillors out there, just to maybe consider as well.
And give that feedback to your councillor. I think, just going back to your previous question, I think the reason we accept the fact that it's a twilight event for the Australian of the Year is because it's been going for some time. I don't remember when it was first held as a twilight event. Maybe it was always held as a twilight event, but I would guarantee that when that started, there would have been people resisting that because, again, it would have been about change.
Yes.
So it's an interesting scenario, interesting discussion. The most important thing is, what I love about it is that it's all about saying, isn't this a wonderful nation?
Absolutely.
Isn't it fantastic to be part of this nation?
That's right. We're still celebrating, folks.
That's right. And the word celebrate, I've tried not to use that too much because, again, for our Aboriginal community, 15.6% of our population is Aboriginal. For our Aboriginal community, then it's not necessarily a celebration, but you can still have an event that talks about this wonderful nation that everyone, our people that moved here, the new citizens we made Aussies this week, or people with 60,000 years of history, this nation is a wonderful, absolutely wonderful nation to be a part of. So that, to me, is what Australia is all about. You've got your ambassadors you talked about, you've got your award winners, which are doing great work in our community.
So you're celebrating them, though. You know what I mean?
You are celebrating different things, that's right.
Yeah.
Now, just a couple of quick points before we finish off on it.
Yeah.
We're talking about this in July. Now, that seems like a fairly early time to make a decision for something for January next year. Is it too early? Should we be leaving it till after the election? The next election is on the 14th of September. And sometimes people say, leave it to the next group of councillors to make this decision. There's a couple of parts to that. One is that the earlier we know about the date, the earlier or the easier it is for our staff to organise the various activities on the day. It's obviously a popular day around the state, around the nation.
Yep.
So a lot of the activities, a lot of the things you want to book in, they're hard to book in if you don't know that in advance. If the election wasn't in September, we probably would leave it a month or two before we made this decision. But we've got caretaker mode starts on the 16th of August, so any big decisions we want to get done before then. If you left it for the new council, you could do that. Their first meeting where they'll make decisions will probably be towards the end of October sometime. So we did talk about that at the committee meeting, saying, are we better off just leaving it till the end of October? And the staff there said, look, that could work, but it's harder to organise various things for the day when you're starting to make those phone calls in November to book those things in, because you lose a fair bit over Christmas as well. So you're getting a bit tight on time. We also have committees, an Australia Day committee in Wellington, Australia Day committee in Dubbo, to go through putting out the entries for the various award winners and judging those. So you want enough time for all of those things to happen as well. So you could do that, but we're here, we're the council of the day at the moment making decisions. So that's step one. Step two, if a new council came in and they felt strongly about it, they could change this decision. You wouldn't even need a rescission motion. When there's a decision made by council, if you want to change that decision within 3 months, you need a rescission motion. After 3 months, you can make a different decision. So here we are in July, we'll make a decision, our staff will start planning that whole process. Come October, that meeting at the end of October, the first meeting of the new council, they could, if they felt strongly about it, say, right, that last council, they had no idea what they were doing. Australia Day, the plan for that is just ridiculous. We'll change it. And that new council could vote on something. Now, it might mean the staff are running around trying to change things, but they could do that. The other thing to keep in mind is our staff. When you have, for example, if we had both events on Sunday morning, what we would do is we'd have a team in Dubbo and a team in Wellington. They'd set up things on Saturday afternoon at some stage. You've got chairs to set up. You've got microphones, speakers, a mini stage, a whole range of things to set up. You get all that set up the day before typically, because if you've got to do it on the morning, I see
where you're going here. So Friday
time.
night, Saturday morning, or whatever the case may be, that could be really pushing it.
Well, if you're doing it, let's say head on the Sunday, you're doing that setup on the Saturday.
Sorry, the day before, Sunday and the Monday,
So,
sorry, Saturday and the Monday, wouldn't it? Yeah.
You're doing the setup on the Saturday, and then what we've done before, when we've done it in the afternoon, ready for the morning, because we've got a bunch of stuff set up, we employ a security guard to stay there overnight in case anyone comes along and wants to do things to that or steal chairs, whatever. So you've got that staff time on the Saturday, 2 lots of staff, Wellington and Dubbo, to do that on the Saturday. And then come Sunday morning, our staff are there obviously nice and early, make sure things are right. And then you're packing all that up. So for our staff that do that, for an Australia Day, and I know one of our staff members who didn't do Australia Day this year, I spoke to her before and she said it's the first Australia Day she hasn't done for something ridiculous, 10, 15 years. So you think about our staff as well. Yes, they get paid to be there overtime. That's expensive for council, but they're still paid to be there. But if they said, I just want to celebrate Australia Day this weekend, no, sorry, you need to be here to help set up for it. So if you had both on the Sunday, that'd be a bigger impost. As it stands at the resolution at the moment, the recommendation at the moment, on the Friday, that'd be normal staff time during the day on the Friday. They'd be setting up on the Friday, get it all run, and there might be a bit of overtime Friday night. Saturday again, yes, there'll be a bit of overtime on the Saturday, but at least they've got Sunday, Monday free. So it's not all about the staff. They'll cope with it. Our staff are fantastic in that whatever decision council makes, they'll run with it. But there are a whole range of other things to consider as well in all of that. And I suppose the last thing is one of the things that I've found the last 2 years when people have given me some feedback about Australia Day, I've taken that feedback and that's what I want. I want people to give us feedback. But I've also said, as a matter of interest, when's the last Australia Day you went to?
Yes.
And it seemed to me that sometimes the people with the strongest opinions about what you were proposing to do or what council resolved to do, those people with the strongest opinions hadn't been on Australia Day for several decades or ever in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it does seem a bit interesting. The people that have been to Australia Days, I think their opinion probably in some ways is of more significance because they've been a part of the experience so far. And even with the ones we've had in Wellington, the people that have been there the night before, I'm really interested in their opinions because their opinion, especially if they've been to ones previously on the day and then ones at a twilight, what do you think of the change? How does that work for you? A whole range of things to consider there. Again, this is not a me decision. This is not a mayoral decision. This will be a resolution of council, a majority resolution of council. As just about everything that council is, a majority resolution of council. Give your feedback to councillors, let them know what you think, and then in 2 weeks' time, 25th of July, we'll make that decision.
Yeah, it should make for a very interesting discussion, I'd suggest. Now, you might be able to correct me here because I heard a little rumour during the week that our beloved CEO, Murray Wood, you sacked him. What's going on? Is this true? Because Murray's a nice bloke, and I'd like to know the reason why you sacked him. And as far as I'm also concerned, does a very good job, by the way. So what are you doing sacking poor old Murray?
We wouldn't not sack someone because they're a nice bloke. It's all about performance, obviously.
Oh, that is, but he's also a nice bloke.
So can I answer the question with a yes and no, the classic yes and no option here?
Yeah. So did you? I'll give you then a direct question. Did you sack our CEO during the week?
In a manner of speaking, yes.
That's not. Oh, okay. There you go. So what's this manner of speaking? Yes or no?
Kind of.
It's like late night. I'm going to drag you in.
That's right. The first point to point out here is that even as the mayor, I don't have the authority to sack the CEO. It needs to be by resolution of council.
Yep.
There are times...
You didn't have a council meeting during the week, so I'm assuming that never really happened.
We didn't. And the way it might work sometimes is you might get a majority of councillors knowing where they sit with the CEO. So you might, as the mayor, you might walk in and say, sorry, you've lost the support of councillors, your job is no longer tenable, whatever it might be, and we're going to hold an extraordinary meeting next week and the outcome will 99.9% be that you will no longer have a job. So here's a heads up so you don't find out about it at the council meeting. But, I don't have the power to do that. It would need a resolution of council. But one of the things that was fascinating from the last council election was that approximately 25%, about 32 CEOs across the state, CEOs and GMs across the state, were no longer with their council shortly after the council election.
What, the new council sacked them?
Basically, yes.
Really?
Yeah.
My goodness.
So it's a large number. Now, we had that poor experience with Mark Riley, who did an excellent job, in my opinion. I had Mark Riley all through my time as mayor. I had Mark Riley most of the time through my time as council. We had Tony Kelly initially, then Mark Riley. And I think Mark Riley did an exceptional job. But unfortunately, after the elections in 2017, when that council was elected, shortly after that, Mark Riley was shown the door.
I remember that now.
Very unfortunate.
Okay.
Now, of course, Mark Riley officially resigned, which often happens in those scenarios.
Absolutely, yeah.
But again, I think the council of the day made a mistake then, but that's my personal opinion there. So if you've got 32 CEOs and GMs across the state out of 128 councils who no longer with those councils shortly afterwards,
That's a lot.
there is a risk every time this election happens. You might say it's a 1 in 4 risk that might happen. Now, one of the things that our staff do, our senior executive staff do, is they have various business continuity plans for various things that might happen. We had a fire back in 2003. That was a major interruption to operations.
I remember that, yes.
Yeah. So what happens if there's a cyber attack? What happens if there's a fire? What happens if a certain piece of infrastructure fails? What are the processes in place? So we've got a whole range of these plans in place because council operating is pretty important. So the CEO, the actual CEO and still the current CEO, Murray Wood, came up with the idea of saying, well, after the election, which is coming up soon, what happens if the new council comes in and they decide, through their infinite wisdom, to remove Murray Wood as a CEO?
Which has already been done, and there's plenty of examples of it, yes.
That's right. So there was the executive team from council put together, a consultant was brought in, and all the executive team knew was that there was another, what they call a BCP exercise, business continuity plan or business continuity process exercise.
Right. Yep.
So there's different things that are thrown at the executive. So it might be a cyber attack.
Yep.
It might be there's just been a fire And they run through that exercise just to make sure that you're testing the process. It's a bit like the alarms go off in your building for a fire drill. It's a bit like a drill.
Yep.
But in this one, I walked in at the start of the executive meeting and said, right, I've got a bit of an issue. I've actually had, and sorry, I'll go back one step. The consultant that steps it all up says, here's the process that's going to happen.
So everyone was aware this was going to be a drill?
Everyone was aware something was happening.
Oh, okay, but they didn't know exactly what.
They just knew it was a business continuity process exercise. So it might have been, we walked in and said, a fire's just happened and the building's burnt out. It might have been, there's been a bomb, there's been a cyber attack, there's been a major part of infrastructure, the water treatment plant just failed. All these different scenarios might be thrown at them in different processes to just...
Testing your ability to think on your feet. Here we go.
Exactly right. So the consultant starts off the day by saying, basically, this is a psychologically safe space. If anyone feels threatened or anyone feels under pressure, then put your hand up and say something's happening. And there's also a term, they use the term no duff, that if something happens and it's real, so you're in a scenario and then actually there is a fire, for example, and they go, right, fire, I better say, no, this is real. Sure it is. So there's this term they say, no duff, so that effectively if something happens that's actually real, then you say no duff and everyone goes, okay, all bets are off, we're back to normal operations.
There's another word I could probably put in there for duff, but I won't say it on air.
That's right. So it's a polite term, and so that's all set up to begin with. So then I walk in and I say, well, I said, okay, I've got a situation I'm unhappy with. I've got our current CEO, who I've instructed, wearing my little mayor boots and stamping them on the ground, I've instructed our CEO to remove a manager from the operations, not a director sitting around there. I'm very happy with all the directors in the room, but there's a manager in particular that I need removed, and Murray hasn't done that. And there's also a DA. I've got a DA from one of my good friends who is having trouble getting this DA through council. I need that DA passed. Murray's refused to do that. We've had some heated discussions over the last couple of weeks. It's gotten to the stage where it's no longer tenable for Murray to be the CEO. And so I had Murray marched out of the room.
Oh, is that right?
So, directors, I've now got this person here. I've got Sam. This person, Sam, is our acting CEO now. She's got all the authority, all the delegation of the CEO. I've got some other things to go and do. I'll be back in an hour. I need three things. I need, first of all, this manager gone. The CEO that I've put in place here knows that has to happen. Second thing I need is I need this DA passed. It's been in the system too long. I need it through and out. I need this development to happen. I've said Dubbo's open for business. I need it to be open for business.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've got the autocracy. Here we go.
And thirdly, there might be a bit of media interest in this. I need a good PR message that's going to make me look good out in the public. I need that to happen immediately. I'll be back in an hour. Thanks very much. And off I went. I had some other things to go and do. And then came back in an hour. Right, how are we going? I need to know the positive outcomes from these. And so the director responsible for removing this particular manager gave me the logical reasons as to why they couldn't remove the manager, including the fact that I did not have the authority to instruct the CEO to remove this manager.
Right,
so I stamped my little feet again. I said, I've just heard a bunch of excuses. I need results. I turned to my acting CEO and I said, if you're not the person for the job, then maybe we need to get another acting CEO in. Anyway, so we went down that process, and the answer they gave was right. The mayor does not have the authority to say remove someone. Yeah. And if I do manage to convince the CEO to remove this particular staff member, here are all the pitfalls this staff member laid out, or this director laid out for me, in terms of unfair dismissals, maybe having to reinstate them. What were the reasons? Did you look at you sideways and you didn't like the look? What were the performance reasons? We've got no other performance issues apart from the fact you're not happy with them. So they went through a whole range of logical reasons, but most importantly pushed back and said, get back in your box.
Yeah, good. So there you go. How did you feel about that?
I was angry about that.
There you go. I was upset.
Let's get through and let's work on a process. Now this DA, just give me the good news on the DA. And so, of course, again, went through this process, and I said to the CEO, I just want it approved. You've got the authority to approve that DA, do it. Well, no, I don't, because we need certain legislation that has to occur. So they gave all the right answers. And again, pushed back on that. And you might have a very illogical mayor. I was trying to be as illogical and angry, although it's hard for me to, I don't yell when I get angry. It's hard for me to get angry, but I was trying to be
I don't think I've actually ever heard you yell anywhere anyway.
No, I don't think it's usually gets you good outcome. So
no, it doesn't tend to.
I don't think
That's
there's much
right.
point to it. I was thinking, as they were giving me these logical reasons, I was almost tempted to just slam my hand down and start yelling and carrying on like an illogical mayor might do, but I thought that might be a bit over the top. So we went through and
bring on those acting skills,
That's right.
A few days on theatre on stage.
And then the third one was the PR message. So they gave me the message about the fact that the CEO no longer with us, there were performance issues there. And I said, well, if I was a good journal, I'd ask this, what about this? Remember, I don't want to look bad in this. I don't want the community to be unhappy with me. How am I going to address that? So there were some good PR messages about this whole process. Well, I think that was the hardest part for them because it was very hard for the directors and the media staff there to actually come up with good messaging why they'd remove someone who they all thought was doing a good job as well.
Isn't that fantastic? Like, it's a great idea to do that because, as you say, you never know when these moments will happen. And so to be prepared and, as you say, this is something potentially could happen. It's happened before. It could well and surely happen again. Are we prepared to deal with situations like this?
Well, one of the things I found interesting was when I was in Canberra a couple of weeks ago, I ran into someone there who I've dealt with in employment scenarios, someone that specialises in local government employment. And I was chatting to him and I mentioned the fact that so many CEOs lose their job, and he said they've already started putting together their list of locums or acting CEOs that can be dropped into various places because they know they'll get phone calls shortly after, and they need to have a list to go to. Okay, we need someone and we're in this location. We need someone for a month or 3 months or whatever it might be. And so, we've got a list here. I know where some of these people are prepared to go. So they've already done some of their work with some of these potential acting CEOs so they can drop someone in quickly because they know it has to happen in pretty quick time frame if it does actually happen.
Is there any sort of safeguard for a CEO in regards to this? Like, I don't know if I want to be a CEO listening to all of this, that like it's a very vulnerable position coming up in the next few months for a few CEOs out there.
38 weeks. That's the only safeguard you have as a CEO. If you're still within your contract, so you can get to the end of your contract and a council could say we're not renewing your contract.
Do they have to have justifiable reasons, or you can just simply say, no, time to go?
Not at the end of the contract. In fact, not even during the contract. It's a resolution of council. You would think from a public perspective you would have some logical reasons, but the way the contract is written, no. But because it is that vulnerability and because there's only one person that councils employ, the safeguard for a CEO is if you're removed any time during your contract for reasons other than outright corruption or someone where you've committed illegal acts, that's a different scenario. But just because I don't like your performance, I don't think you're doing a good job, I've got someone else that we want to bring that's going to do a better job or whatever, the reason is you get 38 weeks pay. So any holiday leave or long
just a
service
normal
leave.
sort of contract payout, so to speak.
Yeah, you've got your normal scenario, normal employment scenario with any of those long service leaves or annual leave entitlements, but you get an additional 38 weeks on top of that. So that's the safeguard. So CEOs going into a job know that at any time council can come along and say, you're gone, but here's something to soften the blow, 38 weeks.
Well, most employees that have stronger safeguards than that in any organisation.
Absolutely right. You're absolutely spot on that employees in an organisation have to have a process, show me the performance, unfair dismissal, all the rest of it.
Absolutely.
CEOs don't have those safeguards. And I think that's part of the Local Government Act, the whole process where the one employee, so it takes away that idea that councillors can go and start telling individual council employees, right, if you don't do this, your job will be gone. They put the protection in place, but the fall guy then becomes the CEO.
Well, I'm so pleased to hear that Murray's still here with us and that you didn't sack him officially.
No, and the cost, keep in mind that 38 weeks, that's a cost. If you go back, and I don't have the exact figure off the top of my head, but in the year that Mark Riley was no longer the CEO or GM of council, in that year, the cost to council for the function of the CEO was over $1 million.
Wow.
Because you had Mark's normal wage, then
plus
you had
the
payout they had to do, then they had to bring in a locum, if you like, short term, and they did some extra things just for accommodation, that sort of thing for that. So in that financial year, and I should look up the number, I might look it up for next week, but it was over $1 million for the cost of that function.
It's a costly exercise, isn't it?
It's a costly exercise, and again, from a Mark Riley perspective, one of the top GMs in the state, well recognised across the state as one of the top GMs. Gee, I hope they had a good reason. I'm not sure they did back in those days.
Well, I'm always of the theory, if you're going to sack a coach or any situation, you want to have a better coach lined up to sort of take over. And if you don't, what are you doing it for?
And it's interesting, I remember many years ago when it comes up to contract renewal time, there's some discussion around councils. What do we do to renew this person's contract? There's a set procedure and there's set timeframes about when you offer a existing GM, you'd have to go to the market, for example, when you offer an existing GM a new contract, or when they notify you if they want to renew their contract. So there's all these processes in place. But I remember previous council, and there was discussion when it was Mark Riley's contract, who was coming up for end of the contract, and we voted, as we resolved to continue on and renew that contract, and that was all fine. I remember one councillor in particular who said, no, we should go to the market and test out the market to see if there's a better GM out there, and if there is, we should employ them. If not, we'll just take Mark. And I actually said, well, you need to make a decision. If you don't like the performance of Mark, remove him and go and find a new GM. If you do like the performance of Mark, just renew the contract.
Yeah.
You can't take it halfway. And if
that's right.
if I was the GM, when a council said to me, we're happy with the performance, but we're just going to go to the market to do something better.
Than you sitting there, but you can stay where you are for the time being.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't necessarily, I'd be very loyal to that organisation, to be honest.
No, so in the end, councillors in that particular council said, no, we will resolve to renew the contract with Mark, and that lone voice of that one council wasn't heard very loudly.
Okay. Alrighty, now, I know you love your citizenship ceremonies, and we talked about this last week briefly, didn't we? Because during the week there was a citizenship ceremony. I have to sort of say it slowly because those C's in there sort of start to sort of drag in together. 17 new citizens here in Dubbo. Talk us through here we go again, ceremony in regards to how it all went.
I think the tricky part is you've got the sh sound at the end of citizenship, and then
that's
you've got
exactly
to get
right. It sort of drags over. It becomes like a little tongue-tied, doesn't it,
that's
afterwards?
Right. So we had people from India, South Africa, Nepal, Bangladesh, Kenya, New Zealand and Pakistan.
Oh, nice.
So nice variety there.
Yeah.
And I do like to have a chat to people after the ceremony and just find out some stories. So I've got two stories for you. Good. I won't identify the countries they came from or names because I don't want the people to be identified.
Well, I enjoy your stories of the new citizens because there are some really good ones.
Some interesting ones. So I did talk to one particular person. I was about to say her or him, but I'm not even trying to identify sex, so I can't identify them. Talked to one particular person, and this person said they originally came to Australia on a student visa, and which happens. We do know
Plenty
that
That's
education is an export for Australia, a very important export. Came to Australia, did their education, and then at the end of that, this person said, I looked at going back home to my country of birth, and I looked at the job opportunities there and the pay opportunities, and this person said, I love performance motor vehicles. I love the idea of owning a performance motor vehicle. I like the old days of Holden, HSV, V8s, that type of thing. And I looked at the opportunities for me in my home country, and I thought, I'm going to struggle to be able to afford a performance vehicle on the pay structure associated with my particular occupation. I looked at the opportunities in Australia, and I went, I can get better pay for my occupation here, and the vehicles are actually going to be better priced than prices back home.
And I get to drive my V8.
The best chance I have of owning a performance vehicle is by staying in Australia. So it's quite interesting why people stay. Often it's just about the quality of life.
I've never heard anyone wanting to stay simply so the fact they can get up there to Mount Panorama and watch the races.
It does sound interesting, but and look, that's a part of it. It's really about the quality of living. What he was really saying, he, she, what they were really saying.
which can be a term. We'll refer to them as they these days. That's right.
That's right. So the idea was really about the quality of living, but it was focused on the performance vehicle. So I thought that was quite interesting.
That's awesome.
Again, why people end up here, it's always interesting. Now, the second one I'll talk about was someone that was in a country and they wanted to get out of that country for really just quality of life. They thought the quality of life in their particular home country wasn't fantastic. They ended up with their employer they had at the time to move to Perth. So they got to Australia, loved Perth, thought that was a great place to live, and they could keep working for the same employer because it was an international firm. As a result of that, they ended up in Sydney with this same firm. Just an opportunity came up for them to come to Sydney. And they were living in Sydney, and they were quite happy in Sydney. And they were ticking away the years to get to the point where they're going to become a citizen. And they've got a couple of kids, or 3 kids. Oh, sorry, I identified them now. So maybe they have some children.
For someone who wasn't going to give away any information, giving away a little bit of information here, I must admit.
They came out to a camp. It was a school camp in Coonabarabran.
Okay.
And they were driving out with kids, with children, whatever number of children they had, and they're driving out.
The person you're talking about definitely knows now you're talking about. That's okay. It's all good.
That's right. And they said as they came into Dunedoo and started driving past Dunedoo towards Coonabarabran, they went, look at this. Why didn't someone tell us about this? This is similar to our home country. This looks fantastic. This looks like a beautiful area. What are we doing? So basically went back, talked to the employer in question and said, can I keep doing my work from a regional area rather than in Sydney? Absolutely. You're working from there. You can keep doing that same job. As long as you can get to Sydney fairly easily on a regular basis, that's fine. And then this person's partner said, right, let's look for some work out around this area. As soon as the partner found a job here in Dubbo, that was it, picked up the family and moved. And they said it was like being in a much better version of their own home.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah. So,
I love that.
Again, the first trigger for them was quality of life for their family.
Yep.
But then when they just saw what was out here and they just, the commute time, the cost of living, the people around there, everything just gelled. And it was almost like they said they'd come home, but a much better version of their home.
That's a great story.
So there are lots of stories like that. I won't go into all the stories that I found out on the day, but they're the sort of things. It's a really uplifting experience. And what I loved was I keep encouraging the newspaper, the journalists, the local media outlets to come along to the citizenship ceremonies. And we had 2 journos come along.
Oh, nice.
At the citizenship. And I encouraged the people in the room, anyone that was comfortable talking to journos, I pointed out the 2 journos there, please have a talk to them. And I did. I saw the journos interviewing some of them, had their phone out recording their comments and their thoughts. And I'm sure we'll see those stories come to light.
Well, in the modern world today, we need more good news stories, don't we?
We do, and I think that's the thing. There are lots of those good stories, and I did see the front page. I missed it actually, but one of my siblings found the front page of the paper during the week, had a photo of myself and one of these new citizens on the front page. So obviously that particular paper has already started running with that. So very exciting, very uplifting. And I think overall, it's just a reason for us to feel good about living here. If people are going to travel thousands of kilometres from around the world and end up here as their destination, then the people that are already here, maybe we can look at this in a more positive light.
Absolutely. So next one's about 2 months' time, is that right?
We'll probably have one just before the election, probably towards the end of August will be the last one. And again, doing that to make sure there's not a big backlog because, again, we'll have no council, we'll have no mayor for a couple of weeks there. So you'll have no, presumably, ability. The CEO could probably do it in an emergency, but you probably have no ability there. So there'll be a bit of a time lag. So at least at the end of August, that should take care of the latest backlog that we'll have.
Good idea. Well, welcome to all of our new citizens. All right. Now, I always love a good acronym, as you know. This is a good one. BOOTS. BOOTS. Now, you're at their graduation ceremony during the week. All right. Now, the first obvious question is, what does BOOTS stand for?
Well, BOOTS stands for Building Opportunities Through Outreach, Training and Support.
Okay. So are they an organisation that runs around here in town, or are they a national organisation? Who are they?
No. So it's actually a program that was designed. There's a woman named Lisa Clark.
Right.
And she's done a fantastic job designing a program within Abergeldy. And I'll go back 2 steps here in a moment. But basically, the BOOTS program was an opportunity for women in this case, it doesn't always have to be women, but women in this case, to do a 3-week trade-ready program. So get some females that might be coming back into the workforce. Maybe they've taken time off to have children. Maybe they've been unemployed for some time. Basically, get them back into the workforce. And this program was designed by Lisa. She's the creator of this whole program to basically deliver more people, in this case more females, into some non-traditional trades. Right. Now, I'll go back a couple of steps here. The Department of Education, Department of Education funds a position for an employee within Abergeldy. Now, Abergeldy is got the bridge project here in Dubbo, so they're a contractor. So they won the contract with the Department of Transport or Transport for New South Wales.
So they're a national company, are they, Abergeldy?
I don't know if they're national. They're a large company.
Okay.
They certainly have projects across the state, and I'd guess across the nation, but I don't know for sure. But they won the tender for Transport for New South Wales to build our New Dubbo Bridge, which doesn't have a better name. It's still New Dubbo Bridge.
That's right.
They've got lots of employees here in Dubbo. They've got lots of contractors. So they're running that whole project. And as part of that process, the Department of Education said, we'll fund someone in your organisation that will help make sure you've got better workforce management, including long-term employees, unemployed people, people maybe females, maybe some Aboriginal people that need to be employed or in that process. And they've got, in that contract, they've got some guidelines for employment in different sectors. For example, they would like to see 2% of the employees female. Not a big number.
No, it doesn't seem like a lot. Yeah.
But a number that is at least an initial target. They'll, as they go forward, they'll get to the point where they won't be guidelines, they'll be mandatory as part of winning a contract. But at the moment, they've got these guidelines in place. But to help them deliver on that, it's no good just saying, here's some guidelines, run with it. So the Department of have basically paid for an employee in Abergaldie. So Lisa Clark is that employee.
Right. She's
employed by Abergaldie, 2-year contract, but Department of Education is paying Abergaldie to employ her.
Yeah, gotcha. Yep, that's right.
Then, as part of that, Lisa's job is to manage that workforce, get more females, get more Aboriginals in there, make sure you've got enough workforce for Abergaldie in general. So she came up with the idea of boots. She got some additional funding out of the Department of Education and some funding out of council, but that was funding that we'd been given by our government department to run a certain program. So it was almost like we transferred that across. So it wasn't our money to use with however we wanted to. And in doing that, she created this program, and it sounded like a fantastic program. First thing, to be able to go onto any of these sites, you need your white card. So the first part of that was to get your white card. So they got these, there were 8 women in this program, got their white card. Then they got them to do a range of things in carpentry. They had pictures of them on excavators. So just doing the basic skills to be able to say, now you're aware, if you like, in some of these trade courses of the basics you might need. So you can't go and just start driving an excavator on a job site or driving a crane or whatever it might be, but you've got the basics there so that if you're interested in this, go and apply for a job.
So it's like almost like a pre-apprenticeship sort of thing, is it? Is that the
and I wouldn't even say apprenticeship because they're not necessarily apprentices in these jobs. They might need some extra training for that particular area, but it wouldn't be as extensive as an apprenticeship.
So they don't have a trade qualification per se, these people are coming in, so they're just, well, I shouldn't say just basically, but they're ladies who have come in to get a bit of a taste of the industry.
Correct. And then they're not employed at the moment. So they're not employed by Abergaldie or anyone else. But now they've got this 3-week trade-ready course under their belt. They've got their official certificate. They've got their graduation certificate. When they start applying for jobs now in some of these different industries, then there's potential for them to be employed in those. So, and it doesn't have to be employed with Abergaldie. So, for example, I spoke to one of the ladies there. She loves cranes. She loves the idea of working on a crane. Interesting enough, she didn't love heights, which is interesting. You don't want to be in a tower crane then.
No, I'm thinking of the one down there at the bottom of Church Street.
That's right.
Stuff, yeah.
So she did say she wasn't that keen on a tower crane, which is fine, but most cranes obviously on the ground. So she now has got this little bit of extra confidence and also a certificate. She's already talked to a crane company in Dubbo and said, right, what else do I need to do? So there's more courses for her to go and do now, but she'll try and get a job with that while she goes and undertakes some more courses.
Helps some of these, the door, doesn't it, really?
It does. Some of these will apply with Abergaldie. There's no doubt about it. Some of these might apply with council in some of our trade areas. And this one was specifically targeted at women, but there's no reason this same program couldn't be targeted at Aboriginal people or targeted at youth or targeted at no one. So in other words,
just
anyone.
A general course, absolutely,
They paid nothing to do the course, so the funding came via the couple of other streams that we talked about there. I did put the hard word on Transport for New South Wales on the day at the graduation ceremony. So you haven't funded any of this, and their response was they've funded the building of the bridge. So they reckon they're done with how much money they put into that. So that's a reasonable argument, although it's still like them.
I suggest also the fact too that this Boots program has got kudos because of the fact that it's been supported by the Department of Education.
Correct.
So they get the little Department of Education, the little insignia, I'm sure, probably sitting on their certificate.
I'm not sure. I didn't actually look closely at the certificates, to be honest, so I don't know whether it actually had a logo of the Department of Ed on there. But certainly part of the course they did was through TAFE, so they obviously would have a TAFE stamp on that, and that's got good respect in the industry. So I like the idea, but the real message here, and I did speak at the graduation ceremony, and what I spoke about was the fact that there are many organisations out there that are realising how many opportunities there are in Dubbo. So there are so many different jobs going at the moment. And even though we've got very low unemployment, so we've got about 1% lower unemployment than the national average, which sounds fantastic, but that creates some other problems in terms of businesses not being able to get enough employees, but ignore that for a moment. Low unemployment overall, you look at that headline figure, wow, that's fantastic. But then you drill down a bit, and if you look at youth unemployment, or if you look at sometimes females trying to get back into the workforce, or maybe Aboriginal unemployment, there are areas, there are different sectors that aren't as low as the overall average in Dubbo. So there are still areas where we could help that, but we have so much opportunity, and I can't stress that enough. We've got a new Dubbo Bridge project. There are approximately 250 people up to working on that. Not all Abergeldie employees. Maybe 100 of those are Abergeldie. The rest might be contractors, and that varies up and down, obviously, with different parts of that project. But you've got that. You've got our rail maintenance facility. You've got things happening in terms of road maintenance at the moment. There's lots of road maintenance work being done. We've got our res. I don't want to keep bringing up our res all the time, but it is so important going forward.
It's a huge part of it.
A huge part of what we're happening there. We know we've got the Toongai project, ASM. We know we've got or Alkane, if that makes it easy for people to remember what it is. But we've got that project, things happening there. We've got roadworks, $20 million they'll be spending on roadworks out in the Oberley Road. There just seems to be so much activity. And we've still got residential building, we've got townhouses, we've got developments. You mentioned number 1 Church Street. There are so many different things happening. So it just sometimes needs to be a path put forward for some people to say, yes, you can do that. Because one of the things that I got out of this graduation ceremony was the confidence. So just talking to these women in general, it's only 3 weeks. But at the end of 3 weeks, they felt now they had the confidence to go and apply for some of these jobs. In the past, they went, I wouldn't mind working on that bridge site, but I don't have the skills, I don't have the background, I don't have experience. I'll just have to put it down as a pipe dream and just go out and try and get another job.
You know what I also love about this program is the fact too, and you've alluded to it very strongly there, is that for a lot of people, they may say, look, I'd like to work in the construction industry, but I don't really know what sort of jobs are actually in the construction industry. This sounds to me like this program, as you say, gives a bit of a taste of everything, so that they at least then walk away and go, hey, I love that. Like the lady was talking about the crane driving. I love that crane driving idea. That was a lot of fun. I think I could make a career out of that.
That's right.
These sort of programs create that. So well done to the group who organised and this young lady who did this as well.
Yeah, and certainly apprenticeships, you talk about that, there's potential there. So, for example, it seems like maybe one, maybe more might like the idea of going into carpentry.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So they've had a bit of a taste of carpentry.
In a particular area.
That's right. And so then they might go and try and get an apprenticeship. So even though I said it's not really pre-apprenticeship, there might be that avenue for some, and the avenue for some might just be a particular area in there where you don't need that long-term apprenticeship. You just need to go and do some extra training. So, good program.
Well done. That's a great program. I love it. Now, we've talked about the Pinch Point program. This is a program that we've discussed at length a few times. Now, you met with some senior bureaucrats from Transport for New South Wales in relation to the Regional Cities New South Wales idea of this Pinch Point program. Talk through to the listeners in regards to what this Pinch Point program is, and how did the discussion go in regards to this with some of these senior bureaucrats during the week?
It's a great example of the power of a group like Regional Cities New South Wales. We all focus in our LGAs on our area. So 7,536 square kilometres I focus on for Dubbo Regional Council local government area. Each of the 15 mayors and 15 councils on Regional Cities New South Wales focuses on their area. But then we sit back sometimes and realise that there are issues that go across boundaries, and one of those is with freight. Movement of freight from A to B might go across a number of LGAs. Now, if I'm a truck driver driving from A to B, I don't think, well, look at this, I'm in Dubbo Regional Council LGA now, and now I'll think differently because I've now moved across to Gilgandra Shire Council.
Probably think I've got another 500 k's to go yet.
That's exactly right. And you're not particularly thinking about each different LGA. So at Regional Cities, we said, let's take a step back and have a look at this, and we call it the Pinch Point program. So areas across the state where we know there's congestion or safety issues in some cases for vehicle movement, and we're talking about freight, but obviously it applies to all vehicles across the state. We went to the state government, this is the last state government, applied for some funding. We got $420,000 out of them for the funding, and that seems like a large amount of money, but it's a fairly complicated process when you start looking at freight movements across the state.
There's lots of roads.
Lots of roads across the state.
Lots of potential pinch points too.
Exactly right. At the end of that, we ended up with a document, a large document, that showed there were 93 spots in the state that we would say were pinch points.
Okay. Does Dubbo have any pinch points?
We've actually got a couple, and it might be good or bad. I'm not sure. I'll tell you a bit about that in a second. But
you're right.
Of those if we fixed all those 93, that would cost $3.9 billion. Now, at no stage
$3.9 billion.
That's right. At no stage were the councils thinking we'd fund this. It really was a program to help the state government, and it was their money, so we're quite happy to help them out in that, to say here are the pinch points. But we knew that was unrealistic to go to the state government and say, $3.9 billion, can you fix those tomorrow? So we drilled down and got the top 10. And we did rank the 93, but we drilled down to the top 10.
The top 10 countdown of the pinch points.
10, that's
there
right.
it is.
And in the top 10, the coverage of fixing those would cost about $350 million. still a large chunk of change, but a bit more realistic to go to a state government and say, here's some help you need. Now,
the government will enjoy the fact that the figures dropped down to 350 million. I think they'd also enjoy the fact you've identified the top 10.
That's right. I think that makes it much easier. In the top 10, there's actually a couple of sites in Dubbo.
You beauty.
Well, I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah, okay.
Because does it mean that our roads haven't been looked after well enough by the state government, and so we've got this urgent need, or does it mean that Dubbo is such a hive of activity that there's more activity there which is creating these pinch points?
Is that because we've got two major highways sort of intersecting here?
Well, three actually come into Dubbo with the Mitchell.
I suppose you could throw the Golden as well.
Yeah, the Mitchell, the Newell and the Golden Highway. Yeah. That's certainly part of it as well. So I suppose, look at it from a positive perspective, we're asking the government for money, and this wasn't me as chairperson of Regional Cities New South Wales saying, make sure there's lots of Dubbo ones in there. It was really up to the consultants. The consultants were...
And they've identified two here. Okay.
They've identified, yeah. So essentially, we then have taken that to the Minister, Jenny Aitchison. So we said to the Minister, here is the program. We physically met with Jenny and we sat down and went through these. Jenny was aware of the program. Jenny was aware we were doing it. We'd given her some updates. But again, at crunch time, here's the document. Here it is. So we sat down with our consultants, with myself obviously as chair, and then a couple of Jenny's staff, and went through it and talked about the program big picture. Now, we didn't expect at that meeting for Jenny to say, thanks for coming along, Matthew.
And
here's that check for $350 million. Have a nice day. The reality is most of these projects will be undertaken by the state government anyway, because they're usually highways or state government roads are responsible for. So we didn't expect that to happen. But the process really is that you need to start the conversation somewhere. Getting the minister on side is obviously a fairly important part of that whole process. But we also know that you need to get the minister's staff on side because they're going to be making some recommendations to the minister.
Yep.
There's lots of competing interests, and the minister needs to be able to rely on information from her staff, needs to be able to rely that they're making the best decisions for the overall state, not because, Matt came along, he's a nice guy, we'll make sure we fund him. I think some people think that's how it's happened. And
it'd be nice if it did, but the reality is it doesn't.
Only because I'm such a nice guy, is that what you're saying?
Well, absolutely, that's exactly what I'm saying.
But I think it's changed a lot in terms of making sure that decisions made by ministers have got robust advice behind them. So it definitely doesn't happen by knocking on a minister's door saying, hey, can you fund this? I'm not sure that it ever happened like that. Certainly I've had conversations with ministers before where I've gained confidence from that meeting, but there's still a process to go through. If it doesn't stack up, it doesn't stack up. Pleasingly, as a result of those discussions with Jenny and various information we've given them, there was a meeting requested by Transport for New South Wales by a number of senior bureaucrats, and we ended up with a video conference with, I can't remember exactly, but about 7 were on that call from Transport for New South Wales. We also had our consultants.
That's a fairly significant number of senior bureaucrats.
It is, exactly right. And they were responsible for different parts of the state and then overall responsibility. And on that call, we also had Tamworth, so the deputy chair of RCNSW is Russell Webb, the Mayor of Tamworth, but also Paul, who is the GM up at Tamworth. He was the lead counsel on the project because you've got to have one agency, one council, responsible to pay the bills, if you like, to the consultants and basically be the lead agency. So effectively, Paul played that role there, which he did a very good job of that. So we had Paul on the call as well. And then, again, the senior bureaucrat. So we had a good discussion, went for over an hour, probably an hour and a quarter. And again, it was all about seeing how they felt about it all and the next steps of that. So the pleasing thing was that they saw value in a lot of it. They liked the idea of that top 10. Again, it's easy to break that down rather than 93 and a big number. The main part in terms of this is they'll now go and look at this themselves, but we use the same guidelines the state government uses. So it's not as if we made up a whole new set of rules to apply. We said the guidelines that you would use, we're using as well. So our main hope for this is that can feed into their strategic plan. Basically, if you come up with a strategic plan that's got a whole range of things you're going to fix, including these 10, then we've done our job. We don't care if it's not labelled RCNSW. If we get the outcome, we get the outcome, so that's fine. Now, again, no guarantees were made there, but ultimately from that meeting, they'll go away, look at our numbers, look at how we came up with our numbers. They'll look at how that fits into their strategic plan. We're going to have a couple of further meetings with them in the future, but probably by early next year, maybe mid next year, we'll hopefully see some long-term strategy from the state government, which will include many of these points, maybe the whole top 10, I'm not sure, but it'll be part of that overall strategy.
Now, the most obvious question I suggest that a few listeners are probably thinking about is, where are the 2 pinch points in Dubbo?
I'll give you, actually I won't give you all top 10, that'll take too long, but I'll give you the 3, there's actually 3 in Dubbo, I'll give you those 3. Number 3 in the top 10 is Bootham Road, Newell Highway. There's safety issues there. Number 5 in the top 10 list is Wheelers Lane, Dubbo, accessibility constraints. And number 6 is Bootham Road, congestion constraints. And the other ones are spread out in different spots around the state.
Okay, very good. All right then. Well, listen, we will wait to see the end result with this, and hopefully the money will come through on that one. Now, I love the fact that you're always catching up with the senior execs to the ministers, because their role is incredibly important, particularly when it comes to the finances side of things. But during the week, you also had time to catch up with some of the small community groups, and one in particular was the Western Plains Trefoil Guild. I hope I said that correctly. My apologies to anybody out there in the guild who took offence the way I said that. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Now, I'm not sure if you have heard of these guys before, but you managed to spend some time with them during the week talking about council and possibly even doing some poetry for them. You love your poetry.
I do, and I hadn't heard of them before either. And
is Trefoil correct? Is that right?
Yeah, it's Trefoil. Trefoil.
Sounds say Trefoil, I say Trefoil. Potato, right. Potato.
Now, this is a group that seems to have members from Dubbo and Wellington.
Right.
And they have spoken to me before about coming along, and it was just a matter of lining up a date. And you've got...
Who are they? Who is this group?
They're actually people that used to be involved with guiding, with Girl Guides. So basically it's adult members of the Girl Guides and the Girl Scouts, of course. And it's basically a way for former guides and leaders to continue their association with the guiding movement.
Oh, that's a nice idea.
Yeah.
I never even knew that group even existed.
I didn't know that either. So and this is the thing with places like Dubbo, there are so many different groups and organisations out there that are doing some wonderful work, and sometimes they're just getting together. So I met with this group.
Did they contact you? Or?
Yeah, they'd reached out to me and said, could you come along and just do a talk for us? And I never know what people want to hear about in those talks. And sometimes they just want me to come and do poetry. Sometimes they just want me to come and talk. Yep. So I met with them, and I met with them at the Roundhouse at Arana Gardens. Now, I've been to Arana Gardens a lot of times, but I didn't actually know about the Roundhouse either.
That's something else I didn't know about.
That's right.
I'm learning so much more here today.
So this is all part of Arana Gardens, but you've got the country club at Arana Gardens, which they've just had some renovations done there recently.
Right.
And so I've done things there. I've done things at the different parts of Arana Gardens. I do some regular poetry up there. But the Roundhouse, I had to go and discover where that was as well, which was just, as the name suggests, it's a round house.
Sounds like a bar. I'll meet you at the Roundhouse.
It does, doesn't it? It seems like a nice little meeting room. So
nice.
It was nice and warm in there.
Excellent.
In the meeting room. So I just sat down, and so I gave them a bit of an overview of some of the areas that council was up to, but more importantly, those sort of events, I like to hear some questions from the group. And so I got questions, and they had questions about, are we going to have, for example, in the next election, wards, as wards gone, which, yes, they are. They were very happy about that. How's it going to be for Wellington representatives? Because there are some Wellington people on this particular Western Plains group. And so I talked to them about, in my opinion, the maths of that you got 20% of the population from Wellington, you probably have 20% of the councillors come from Wellington as well, thereabouts. And so a range of questions. We talked about some renewables, what some of their thoughts were on renewables. I did talk to them about the cashless concept we've talked about before with
their general approach to all of that. What was their thoughts?
They haven't used any of the waste facilities in Dubbo or Wellington for a long time, so it didn't really impact them, but they understood the logic behind it, and they were most concerned about whether or not they were going to be charged merchant fees, because one of them said...
That's a big one for people, isn't it?
It is, and they said there's been a bit of a push from some people to go back to cash because they don't want to keep paying the merchant fees. So I understand that. So certainly I know in my personal business I refuse to charge merchant fees. I know at council we don't either, but I know some businesses do. They want to reclaim that money, and I think it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. So again, that's my personal view on it, but we certainly aren't at council. So lots of things talked about, and then of course a couple of poems. I did a banjo poem for them.
I did a poetry be in there. So who we do this time? Because maybe you did a Roald Dahl one recently.
I did do a Roald Dahl one. So this time I did a banjo. I did a band from Ironbark.
And traditionals. Yeah,
I just thought the fact they're from Wellington.
Like and
I also did one of mine, which is called "Who's Doing the Dishes," which is one about my bad parenting skills.
Is that right? So look at you, little poet.
I
didn't realise you actually wrote poetry as well.
Yeah, I do a few.
Multi-talented man.
I say that I do them in the style of banjo, but I don't claim to be anywhere near as good as banjo. But it's that bush poetry, although Who's Doing the Dishes is a modern form of bush poetry, and bush poetry is really about the metre and the rhythm more so than the actual topic as such. So Who's Doing the Dishes is about how our kids used to always disappear after tea time, after dinner time,
tell you what,
before the dishes were done.
I can still relate to that. When my kids come back, it's like, there's crickets sort of sound in the kitchen after the plates are put on the side. It's like, all right, get yourself back here.
Well,
I need to get this poem so I can recite it to them.
What I found was that they always had some fantastic excuses. And what I love about banjos poetry, bush poetry in general, is that they'll normally take a true story and then exaggerate, give it more colour, if you like. So you end up with a story that's a bit over the top, but there's some grain of truth there.
Yes,
and so that's what I've done in Who's Doing the Dishes. I've taken the grain of truth, which is like they've always got these great excuses. They can't help with the dishes because, and they're brilliant excuses. Yeah. So I've come up with a poem where every excuse I've ever heard is basically thrown.
I can almost sort of see a line of murder, bloody murder, sort of thrown in there amongst it sort of stuff when you're sort of throttling your child to get in the...
We resort to violence. You don't want to spread rumours here. Violent nature there.
Well, what do you say about the fact the Australian poetry, we sort of like to exaggerate the truth a little bit with it?
Yeah, right. So anyway, all good fun, but it is nice to meet with those community groups just to basically give them some insight into council, but also I love to hear feedback from those community groups as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. Well done. Now we know that we need more housing. It's a common thread across everywhere, isn't it, right now? Not just here in Australia, it's across the world, I can tell you. Now, I saw an announcement during the week where you gained significant funding from the federal government to help in regards to this issue. Did we get some money here to... I didn't actually realise, I could be wrong here, a council involved in actually building houses? Is this the money for this, or is this something else? Like, what are we talking about here with this federal government funding?
Yeah, not at all. We don't want to
do
build
that. That's not part of what we do, is it, as a council?
No, and some councils might do that in some situations, but it's certainly not something that I would see as a core responsibility of council to build housing. We did get $1.26 million from the Australian government's housing support program.
That's a significant amount of funding.
It is, so that's quite nice. And I know I talked about that fact that we got this money, and some people said, well, that won't build you many houses. It doesn't really solve the housing crisis. You're right. Yeah. It doesn't solve the housing crisis. And if that was all it was for, then I don't think the Australian government...
2 homes a day, maybe, I don't know.
Probably, yeah, two, 3 homes.
The current sort of situation.
But I think the federal government will be spending their money poorly if that's what they did it for. The whole idea of this is to make sure that we create an environment that allows housing to occur in the right way. So
sort of planning-based money.
Exactly right. So there's two things with this. It'll allow us to create the regional and affordable housing strategies, and also help us further develop the Northwest Urban Release Area Master Plan.
I was going to say, is this going to link in with that? Okay.
Yep. So basically, we're going to make sure Dubbo's got the right amount of planning or zoning for the correct housing we need going forward. And there's no doubt about it, that's changing. We talked before about people maybe not loving the idea of change. Well, housing styles will change. And I know I've talked to people about it. The old days, you had your 1,500 square metre block, maybe 1,000 square metre block, and you had your house on that, your 200 or 300 square metre house on that, and you mowed the lawn every Saturday morning, and you looked after your garden, and that's changing. A lot of that change is about affordability, but it's also about the best use of the resources. Dubbo's growing outward all the time. You get to a limit where how far do you keep growing before your Narromine, for example? Narromine often jokes that Dubbo is the eastern suburb of Narromine, but if Dubbo keeps growing, if Dubbo keeps growing and growing, then how long before Narromine really does become the western suburb of Dubbo?
They're a bit like Perth. They start referring to Dubbo as like the wise men from the east.
I don't know if they go that far. So this is all about making sure we've got the right strategies in place, and that might be more medium density zoning, so maybe more townhouses, maybe more dual occupancy blocks that used to be called duplexes, maybe just smaller block sizes. So sure, you might have your 200 or 300 square metre house, but it might be on a 600 square metre block. Maybe you don't have lawn there, maybe you have fake lawn, maybe you're just changing those strategies. What does that look like? Well, I can't give you the answer right now today. I've got a bit of an idea of where it should be going, but how do we develop that strategy and make it work for the overall Dubbo? And again, that Northwest Precinct will be an important part of that. So basically, this is all helping to achieve the National Housing Accord's target of 1.2 million homes over the next 5 years. That's not 1.2 million homes in Dubbo, obviously.
No, that's a lot of homes for Dubbo, and watch out.
Right. So that's
talk about a boom.
That's the National Housing Accord for the nation, and so they've got money available. So we took advantage of that. We put a grant application in. We've got that money, so that's fantastic. That will help us put those strategies in place. And if council's doing this job correctly, one thing I've always been impressed with our council and good councils across the state is they're not planning for today or tomorrow or next week or next month. They're planning 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the track. And hopefully these things that we put in place, these strategies we put in place now, developers can look at that. They've got confidence in that. They know they're going to be able to spend money and see that that's going to deliver good outcomes for them from a private perspective, but also deliver the outcomes we need for Dubbo.
Do you have to report back to government with this in regards to how you spend this money?
Absolutely. There's always an acquittal process.
Right.
Do they have to look at the plan and say, we think that plan's a good plan or a bad plan? Not so much at that level, but more the way you've spent that money and make sure you've spent that money in the correct way. You didn't take that money and then go and spend it on filling some potholes, for example.
Yeah, right,
You've got money that's delivered for a specific program. You've got to demonstrate that money's been delivered in that program, which is fair enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. And is that like, what do you have, 12 months to sort this, 2 years? Like, what's the general sort of time frame in regards to when you have to report back to government on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, basically, there'll be a deed. You'll sign a deed. Council will sign a deed with the federal government. I'm not sure in this particular one what the time frame is, but there will be a time frame. You'll have a time frame to deliver the project, and then you'll have a certain amount of time after that to do the acquittal process. So there are timelines, and the deed, once you get the funding, you go, that's fantastic, but then you read through the deed, that's got more details in there, that'll have timelines in there. And we've talked about, for example, the Wiradjuri Cultural Tourism Centre with some of the money we've received that we're using from Create New South Wales for part of that. And I think I mentioned that some of that's got to be spent by the end of this financial year, so basically before 30 June 2025. So that's the sort of thing. So you've got deadlines, you've got to make sure you deliver on those deadlines, otherwise you've got to hand the money back. And I hate handing money back.
Absolutely.
Federal or state government.
Yeah,
once you've done the hard work to get the grant, you want to make sure you spend the money
and
and get the good outcomes you need.
Now, while we're on the discussion there of funding, I also saw the state government made an announcement for some more money for some tennis court repairs in Wellington. You beauty. So we've got, this is going to be the new Arthur Ashe Stadium or something like over there in New York City, a big complex being built. Is that the sort of thing, or what are we doing?
We might need a touch more money than what we got. We got $521,000.
Oh, that'll certainly help.
521,059, $521,059 for that. Now, that's at Teamsters Park.
Where's
so
that?
That's in Wellington, but Montefiores.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. Montefiores.
Yeah. I'm sure the French will enjoy the way you said that.
That's right. So that's over in that part of Wellington.
Yeah, okay.
And so we went down with Dougal Saunders, our state MP, and went down there for some photos around that announcement. Had a couple of our Wellington councillors there. Jess Goff and Richard Ivey were there, and we had Shibli Chowdhury from Dubbo. I say Dubbo and Wellington councillors. We're all councillors. I kind of hesitate saying Dubbo and Wellington councillors, but we're all just Dubbo Regional Council councillors. But there for the announcement, and you can see that tennis courts aren't being used at the moment. In fact, I took a photo of the sign that says tennis courts are closed. We've got some reconstruction required. Yeah. So they've got some big cracks in them. They've been filled in with some sort of substance.
Are they
previously.
a sand-based one or a cement-based right now? Or?
These are a bitumen, like
bitumen.
A thin bitumen base. And I think I looked at it and went, not that I'm an expert on this, but the bitumen looked fairly thin, so it probably was a bit thin, and so they have cracked up. So again, that'll be redone now. Exactly how? Probably a concrete surface, which will be a bit hardier long term. So a bit of work around there, a bit of work on the playground as well. There's a little bit of playground equipment. We got to climb all over and have a slide down the slippery dip.
Did you now? There you go. Get some photos of that as well.
I got some photos climbing all over it there. That's right. So we'll spend that money in the best way possible. Yeah. If there was an extra bit left over at the end, we might spend it on the canteen facilities there. But basically, $500,000 to spend around that area to improve that, which is fantastic. And again, we seem to be going well at the moment with our grant applications and getting good success rates.
A lot of grants coming through right now. So well done to the council who are putting out there the grants group. What is there, a special name you call that group? Is there a certain group, or does each little division have its own section set aside for grants?
We used to have a grant officer who had the job of trying to find those grants, apply for those grants, etc. We don't have that at the moment, and it didn't seem the most efficient method, because what happened was the grant officer would say, right, we need this grant for a housing strategy. Well, I'm not an expert on that, so I'll go and get the team that are doing that to give me all the details to fill in the application. I need something for our sports and recreation, our outdoors area. I'll go and find someone who knows about the tennis court at Teamsters. So, hold on, do I know about that? I don't really know about that. So I'll get someone that knows about Teamsters Park and get the details off those. So in the end, it seems to be the best way to do it is to have each individual area division to put in those grant applications. But I think a really important part of it is delivery. I've seen councils in the past who maybe didn't get as many grants because when they were getting grants, the state or federal government giving those grants didn't see outcomes in reasonable timeframes and didn't see maybe good outcomes as well. So it was harder for them to get grants going forward. I think now state government in particular has a lot of confidence in Dubbo Regional Council using the money in the best possible way, delivering with good outcomes, making sure the community's on board, community consultation's done right. It's a whole range of things where if I'm the state government and I'm going to hand money over to a council, I want to know that someone can be there cutting a ribbon in a short time frame and know that that's a project the community wants. So I think there is that confidence, and that's taking a little while to build that confidence back up in this council.
Oh, it's fantastic to hear, and look forward to sort of seeing some future tennis stars come out of Montefiores. Sydney Morning Herald. There's a story in it during the week about a league table for DA approvals for, the old building approvals and all this sort of thing, and DAs and development applications and all that sort of stuff. Gives a little bit more detail in regards to this article because Dubbo got a mention, and may I say a fairly prominent mention. And where do we sit on this table?
So it's interesting. One of the things that the state government, Paul Scully, the Minister for Planning, he talked about the fact that it's great that we've got all these programs, plans from the state government, from the federal government as well. We just talked about the Housing Accord, 1.2 million homes. It's great that we've got all these different programs to push housing, but if it then gets to the council and the DA process and it stalls there, if the bottleneck is there, then it doesn't matter what the state government and the federal government are doing, it's going to still slow down that process that we need to roll them out. So Paul Scully, as the minister responsible, said, I've got a couple of things. The first thing is he sent a letter to all councils. I got the letter from the minister, and it had the statement of ministerial expectations. So they've got a range of expectations where they've got different amounts of days or time frames associated with various activities in the planning process. So this is really saying to the various councils, 128 councils out there, here's what I expect. To be fair, there are expectations going forward that are going to be tighter timeframes now. To give you an idea, determining DAs as soon as practical, or whichever is the lesser of council's previous financial year average, or an average of, so ignore all that, basically from the 1st of July 2024 to the 30th of June 2025, so this financial year, the minister expects 115 days from lodgement for a DA to be determined.
Right, okay.
The following financial year, he expects that to be down to 105 days. The next year, 95 days. The next year, 85 days.
Right. Okay, so he's clamping down.
That's
sort
right.
of saying we need to become more efficient.
Now, we look at that and we say...
Where do we sit on that front?
Yeah, we're way above it.
Okay.
Well, sorry, way better than that. Not
I was going to say way, but
not number of days. So
is that a good thing?
We're dramatically better than that at the moment.
So our approval time is a lot less than that, is it?
Correct. Now, again, you get some that are high and some that are low because of different parts of that, and sometimes there's different ways of counting determination of DAs. When you talk about the amount of time it takes for council, there are different processes where the clock might stop when we go back to a developer, a proponent, and ask for more information. So the DA gets lodged, we go through in our process, we've been working on it, or it's in our system for 15 days. And then we go, okay, we need some extra information on this noise study. The clock stops as soon as we go back and ask the developer for more information.
Because it's no longer really up to council to be pushing it through. Now they're waiting for more information to bring it through to enable them to push it through again.
If that developer takes a day to come back, great. If they take 6 months to come back, not so great, but it's unfair that reflects on council. But again, from our perspective, it's good for us to continue to push that particular
Is that how it works
developer.
across the board? Is that the standard process?
Yeah, that's right. So so there are different clocks because sometimes some council will claim they've got a clock that's a very short time frame, but then when someone else looks at it, they go, well, no, I lodged that DA and 12 months later I'm still waiting, but hold on, we waited 6 months for you to get that information back. So sometimes there are some clocks that just say from the time it's lodged to the time it comes out the other end, how long was that? And sometimes that might be unfair on councils, but that puts the pressure on councils to really go back to those developers and say, hey, give us this information. We need this urgently to keep progressing this. Other clocks just count the amount of time it sits in the system.
Okay, gotcha.
So that's that one part of it. Again, we're quite comfortable with those expectations.
Well, it's a good point to clarify because quite often you'll see people make comments about, it takes forever to get the DA through. I had an application in there and it took me 2 years to get it through. Well, you never know. Council may have turned around and said, well, mate, we need you to go and get this stuff sorted out for it. They may have taken 18 months to get that information. But as you say, if the clock had stopped, it's a bit unfair to turn around and put all of that back on one council.
That's right. Now, there are other parts where sometimes we do take too long. Sometimes we don't have enough staff. Sometimes they're complex DA. Sometimes we've got further information. So it's not all a bed of roses, but obviously it's an important part of the overall process. Now, the league table they talked about is basically a development application assessment performance. And this league table will be essentially published on a regular basis, and it'll be kept up to date so people can look at different councils and see how they perform. Now, I assume all 128, but not all 128 do DAs. I'm trying to think of a reason why they wouldn't, or maybe they're a very small council, they don't do many DAs. But essentially, it should be for the 128 councils across the state. And they've already got a copy of the league table. And so I grabbed a quick look at that to see where we sit and just to see average how it sits. So at the moment, the average assessment days for the councils across the state is 114.
Yep.
So it's 114 assessment days. As far as I know, those average assessment days are the clock ticking with council, not while waiting for information.
Right.
Now, I could be wrong on that, but that's the way I read the league table. I'm still waiting for the more information on the league table as such. So that's the average, 114. And then you've got the list published there with all the different councils. Now, Dubbo sits at 49 in that league table, 49 average assessment days. Yeah. That sits at 18th on the list. So pretty good.
Top 20.
But when you break it down further and look at it, Dubbo probably looks even better.
All right.
If we look at, for example, the total development cost in that rolling league table, so we're at 18th, 49 days of assessment. Our dollars in terms of those assessments, $219.6 million.
That was what the development applications came through as the next for this financial year.
Well, no,
last
this
financial year
period. So I'm not sure this period. So again, it's all very new. So I'll have more information as we go forward. So I apologise. I'm not over all the details because this really is just been out in the last week or so.
Okay.
But when you look down at the other 17 councils above us in terms of better assessment days, there's no one else above $80 million. So we're significantly higher than those. So you think, well, that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, some of those...
So we're number one above 80 million.
Correct. That's the way I'm playing it.
We'll take a number one roll on that one.
Are as low as $2 million total in developments there across that time frame. $7 million, $17 million, $5 million. So
council groups around.
That's right. Now, then you look at the number of applications, and this is probably even more important than the dollars because number of applications, obviously, you need staff to process a lot more. So in the time frame in question here, we processed 588 applications. Okay, so it's a reasonable number.
Absolutely.
In the list that are better than us, the 17 above us, the highest next one is 267.
Oh, so look, we can say it again. And anything above 270, let's just say,
that's right.
We're number one.
And some of those, again, and looking at that list that are above us, 5 applications in the time frame. Looking down here, 35, 48. So compared to our 588, quite significant. So for a council that does a large number, then I think we're outstanding in that process.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean that we sit back and go, okay, planning team, take next week off, go to the pub.
Now, well done. Take a break for 3 weeks.
I suppose the main thing here is that it's good. I think we're going well. I think we've got a good team there. We've got a team that are efficient in what they do and they do a good job. And yes, every now and again, there'll be some developer who'll ring me and say, this isn't happening quick enough. What can you do about it? I can't go and direct the staff to go and do anything about it. I can't make them do anything to make things happen faster. But certainly I can investigate if there's a certain problem. And most of the time when I go looking, it's a problem where we're waiting for information or there's something they're not happy with in that DA, so they want to argue the toss on that. And look, we're not perfect. We get some where it does take too long. It shouldn't be in the system for that long. And sometimes that's just a process of making sure you keep that communication open. The developer forums that we've talked about before, I think that's a really important part of that, keeping those avenues open to make sure you can have those discussions. And in that public forum, bring it up and say, I think the DAs can be done better, or I got stuck on this one. How can you make that work better? And in some cases, I'd prefer it to be brought up in that public forum because you're not like you're going one-on-one to someone and say, can you fix this up for me? And
no,
again,
that's right.
No, we can't.
That's called corruption.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, so that's interesting. We'll have more information as we go forward. And again, I've got a little bit of lack of information on that because it is also new, but I think it's important to have that discussion straight away.
Yeah, no, well done. Now, it's probably not a podcast unless we bring in renewables, because it seems to be a fairly common sort of point of our discussions from time to time. But look, so touching on renewables for this week, it looks like the Kerrs Creek Wind Farm has some information sessions coming up. So talk us through that. What's happening there with that?
Just a very quick one. The Kerrs Creek Wind Farm, as you mentioned there, that's a wind farm that's right down on the edge of our boundary with Cabon. So it's all in Dubbo Regional Council LGA, but you can see Cabon from the Kerrs Creek Wind Farm. Yep. And there's information sessions happening. So these are run by the proponent, so they're not run by council. Yep. So these are information sessions. There's a newsletter that came out. So just to let people know, on Wednesday, the 31st of July, at the Ukarina Soldiers Memorial Hall in Ukarina.
Right.
And they've got a drop-in session from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. So you can have a one-on-one chat with someone, just find out some information, drop in at that time, and then the formal presentation and public Q&A will go from 5 to 6.
Okay.
So that's one thing, just more information, and that's part of what the proponents need to do in these. They need to have these sessions to let people know. And then on Thursday, the 1st of August, at the Cabon Community Centre at 98 Bank Street in Molong, there's again a drop-in from 2 to 5 and the presentation and Q&A from 5 to 6.
Okay.
So it's interesting that it's not in Cabon, but they actually are holding a session in Cabon, because it does. I think there are people in Cabon that are near the boundary that are looking across, and they'll see some of those wind turbines. So I think that's important there. The other one, briefly.
I was going to say to you, looking through here too, staying in Wellington on Monday. You've got a visitor coming, or a couple of visitors coming here, a couple of important visitors.
We have, and I can't talk too much about the content of what's happening there.
Right.
But certainly it's common knowledge now that we've got two ministers turning up. We've got Penny Sharp and Paul Scully, and they'll be making some further announcements around the renewable energy zone, around the Central West Arana renewable energy zone. So they're both flying in Monday morning, going down to Wellington, and they're basically doing some media around there and having some discussions with some people down there.
If you get two ministers to come out at the one time to make an announcement of place, normally they're just not simply coming out here to do some sightseeing.
So it should be a good announcement, is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm implying, is the fact I've got a feeling this might be a good announcement. So
hopefully.
I look forward to hearing about this next week in our podcast.
Right, well, I'll let you know as soon as I'm allowed to talk about more of the information.
Look forward to it.
Maybe next week. How about
Exactly, that sounds good. All right. Well, Matt, you've spoken about your poetry, and of course we always like to finish off our podcast with your Limerick of the Week. So, topic this area. What are you looking at this week? What's your focus?
Are you happy to call limericks poetry? Are you happy to go that far?
Of course, absolutely. Well, if you call a haiku, a poem, and then I'd regard to a limerick as being a poem.
I have a great amount of respect for limerick as a form of poetry, because it's actually quite difficult to get enough content. Sometimes when I'm trying to get content into the limericks, enough content into a limerick. So it's a very concise, very succinct form of poetry.
It's highly structured.
That's right. And if you can just write normal poetry, I can have as many lines as I like. I can write a 3-minute poem, a 10-minute poem.
You've got rhythm, you've got metre, you've got all these sort of things you've got to focus in a limerick. It's a very important stylising form of poetry.
So I'm glad, because I've always called them a form of poetry, so I'm glad that I've heard officially now from an educator in the area that we can call it a poem.
With a big tick, I'd suggest.
Excellent. That's fantastic. So this week, I actually want to talk about Australia Day. So I thought there are lots of significant things happening in amongst all the things we talk about today, but I just want people to be aware of Australia Day and give feedback to councillors, because they are important, significant decisions.
Yes.
So I thought this week I'd write about Australia Day and what might be happening next year.
Fantastic.
Here we go.
Here we go.
In Dubbo, we've thought up anew. For Australia Day, here's what we'll do. The date remains true, but events will ensue on a day when more people can rendezvous.
Oh, nice work. And look, again, well done on your limerick. As I said, it's a lovely form of poetry, and you always do a wonderful job of it. Well, folks, that wraps us up for our normal podcast we do each week from our Straight from the Mayor's Mouth. Until next week, take care.
Straight from the Mayor's Mouth with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.